everybody. Welcome again. Another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Friends, we all know Australia is resource king. Obviously, gold, a lot of interest right now. Iron ore, always very strong. But also nickel, copper, incredibly powerful within Australia. Share prices are reacting as well. And with us today, we have a fantastic nickel explorer. We have Chris Daws from Estrella Resources. And he's going to talk to us all about his flagship project, what he's seeing, his history in nickel, and how he is different. With that introduction, Chris, welcome to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets.
Greg, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Pleasure to be here. Certainly pleasure talking to 180 Markets. And thanks to the viewing audience for taking time to have a listen.
Absolutely. Hey, Chris, I always say people invest in people as much as projects. Can you just give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, look, thanks, Greg. I'm a Kalgoorlie born and bred West Australian, lived and grown up in the mining industry. From a young age, I was always interested in the mining game. I spent quite a bit of time in the financial markets in my early part of my career, raising money for junior mining houses and raised considerable money for quite successful companies. Jubilee Mine comes to mind. I worked for a resource specialist broking house, Ayers Reid. I've worked for some of the bigger firms, Merrill Lynch and ABN AMRO, in the career that I spent, specifically focusing in the junior mining game. But I saw an opportunity in the early part of the 2000, the rolling of the century. Western Mining Corporation, which was a company that really grew out of the goldfields, Kambalda, the big nickel discovery that they made in the 60s and created the nickel boom. I saw an immense opportunity when Western Mining started to divest their nickel assets, and I decided to go from the financial markets arena, raising capital for junior mining houses, to actually stepping up on the plate and actually looking at running these businesses and buying the assets. We looked around for some time at a couple of the assets that Western Mining were divesting, and we made a conscious decision at that point. There was numerous businesses chasing the only small pool of assets that Western Mining were divesting at Kambalda, and we ended up acquiring the Windara nickel mine, which was obviously the famous Poseidon nickel boom. Everyone knows and hears about. It was an extremely exciting time back in those days, and share prices ran extremely hard and heavy. And it was an asset that we acquired from WMC in the early part of 2000, and we ran it for 3 or 4 years, right through the nickel boom that we had in 2006 and 7. And we run that small business from a 6-7 million market cap through to $780 million before we sold to Andrew Forrest in 2007. Obviously, Twiggy went on and it's created bigger and better things with Fortescue Metals, but he still has a significant interest in nickel, still has a significant interest in now what Niagara turned into, and the Windara nickel project into Poseidon nickel. And so that was my sort of background into the nickel game and running nickel businesses, and it was extremely successful, extremely exciting. And we're now looking 10 years on down the track, and we're looking to replicate that again. Obviously, back in the journey, we looked at and reviewed many nickel assets in Western Australia, and there is a plethora of nickel sulfide projects, but there's only a very small group of significant mafic-laid intrusion type nickel deposits, and they were the deposits that really excited me. They were the deposits that we wanted to go and chase, and fortunately enough, a few years ago, we managed to put our foot on the Carboid Nickel project, and hence we've started this journey with Estrella Resources as me as the CEO. We've invested heavily privately into the business, and we're looking to obviously make Estrella into a significant success, like we did back in the Niagara day in the previous nickel boom of 2006 through to 2008. And we're looking for the next nickel boom and the next big journey, and hopefully we can take our shareholders along for the ride.
Yeah, that's incredible, and it leads to so many. I guess it puts together a lot of connections, which is the Carboid, your flagship project. For those of you that don't know, It has a history, interestingly, with WMC in the first place that maybe you can touch on. And I suppose the second is that what is it about the project maybe that other people have just missed?
Yeah, look, Greg, the history of the carboid is really the key. The opportunity that I see, it has a very interesting history. It was discovered by Great Boulder Mines in the early part or the later part of the nickel boom, 1969. Great Boulder Mines geologists actually were prospecting, surface prospecting, found a gossanet surface, copper staining, and drilled the first initial holes into those gossans and discovered the carboid nickel pipes. They are located about 80 kilometres northeast of Kalgoorlie in what you would deem a remote area. It was away from all of the noise of Kambalda and the other major nickel discoveries up further up the belt towards Leinster, and it was a virgin discovery made in the late part of the boom by Great Boulder. Great Boulder themselves were taken over by WMC, and WMC then forward and developed the mine in the 1970s and extracted some ore before the nickel price came back and the mine was closed. Over the course of many years with the malaise in the nickel price, the operation really was shunted to the back. Western Mining focused on other areas. They focused on Kambalda when the nickel price returned in the 80s and early part of the 90s, and carboid sort of sat there as a bit of a non-core, unloved asset of WMC. And in the end, the asset was then passed on to some ex-executives of WMC that formed a new float in Defiance Mining in the mid 80s, I believe, 1987. And they looked at that project purely from the point of view of going back in and redeveloping the mine. We're looking at exploration external to the mine that Western Mining had developed and had explored. They were purely looking at developing the mine with the nickel price moving up a little bit higher, and all their intentions and all the attention was put into all of the work that would allow Defiance to restart operations. Unfortunately for Defiance, they didn't get there. They did dewater the mine. They did do more drilling. They did find another ore pipe at depth, number 4 pipe. And unfortunately for them, the nickel price, as it does, goes through cycles, and it wasn't developed. And it wasn't developed, and it hasn't been developed since that date that Western Mining had mined it in the 70s. So it's been sitting there for some time. Defiance went on in the later parts and became a .com company because the mining industry in the late part of the 90s was absolutely flat. You couldn't raise a penny. And we had the .com boom, which we all remember pretty well. And Defiance became a company that was focused on, I think, heart monitors at the time, and their experience in mining was effectively nil. Along came another mining company that had some background into the style of mineralisation that carboid is, and a mafic-laid intrusion, and that was Titan Resources, yep. A group of ex-WMC executives. And they came in and bought the asset reasonably cheaply and then went to explore it in the early part of 2000. But then themselves got into some troubles in some other assets that they were developing. And they eventually, I guess, were looking for an avenue to develop carboid, and they had to bring in a joint venture partner because they were actually on their knees through a development of another nickel asset that didn't go quite right for them. And so there's this history of and plethora of joint ventures and groups playing in and out of the asset, really focused on redeveloping the mine, not looking at the broader opportunity, the exploration opportunity that carboid has. So, and we come along in 2017 and we ended up doing a deal with another group that ended up acquiring the assets from Parlinghurst, which were offshore, that weren't interested in the assets anymore. They'd taken over Titan, taken over Cons Min. And
so it kind of all ties up.
and it's just sort of sitting there, not happening. And because I knew what we were dealing with carboid, I was very keen on getting a hold of it, and then applying modern technology, applying modern geophysical to the asset, which has come along in leaps and bounds, even in the last 2 or 3 years, let alone the last decade. We're here, and now we're applying this technology to unravel the exploration opportunity.
Yeah, and that's, you mentioned, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and please explain it in a layman's terms. You mentioned that, the mafic laid intrusion deposits, that was something you were looking for, and modern technology. Can you just explain to people how things have changed and why also this deposit type of technology is important over the last, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, look, we used downhole geophysics, EM technology back in the early part of 2000. You drill a hole, you basically run loops out, you put a tool down, you electrify, you try and find conductive sources, which ultimately we hope are ore bodies and not graphitic shales or some other conductive source. And back in the early part of 2000, you might get a reading 20 metres, 50 metres at best off the hole. Today, with specialised tools, more responsive transmitters and receivers and higher power, you can see these ore bodies from surface down to 600 metres if you're using moving loop ground EM or high-powered moving loop ground EM, or downhole up to 200 metres from your drill hole. So it becomes a lot more cost-effective to drill a hole and survey it and get quite a bit of distance from the hole to see what you're dealing with, seeing whether there's an ore body nearby. One of the very first things that we did with carboid is we re-entered a hole that was drilled by one of the joint venture partners of Titan in the day, and they drilled down through the pipe system at carboid looking for the source of the carboid nickel sulfides, and that's really the key, and that's what we're chasing. We're chasing the source of the nickel sulfides at carboid, because carboid themselves are only representative of a basal contact source body of massive sulfide nickel that's been remobilised and shot up through the country rock, and is only a very, very small portion of ultimately what that deposit is. So carboid rocks, if you were to drill carboid rocks in its entirety today, there's probably circa about 50,000 nickel tonnes in the carboid pipes in total, and you can probably put in anywhere between 1% to 20% of the sulfides are representative of the massive sulfide source. So if we took at the top end at 20%, and there's 50,000 nickel tonnes at carboid, you're talking about a source nickel 250,000 nickel tonnes. That's a very large deposit. Nova Bollinger is a 300,000 nickel tonne ore body. It was taken over for, I think, $2 billion or $1.8 billion.
Yeah.
It's
a couple $100 million between friends anyway.
Yeah. And so it's the mafic layered intrusions that have these very large ore bodies. So the style is different to your komatiite hosted nickel sulfide projects, where you might get, if you're very lucky, 100,000 tonnes like your long plus 100,000 nickel tonnes, but they're sort of more in the range of anywhere between 10 and 30 and 40,000, 50,000 if you're lucky. So we're dealing with a style of mineralisation that can produce very large ore bodies. Voisey Bay is an example. Nova Bollinger is an example. The Sally Malay deposits up in the Pilbara is another example of mafic-layered intrusions. Radio Hill, and now seeing these new deposits being discovered of recent times because of the technology that we're able to apply into these deposits and the knowledge that we have. You've had the Julimar discoveries from Chalice, which we've seen an enormous market re-rating of Chalice in the last months, and Legend Mining at Mawson's West in the Fraser Range. So that's what we're chasing. We're chasing a Nova Bollinger. We're chasing a Julimar. Right.
So the style, this mafic is certainly, we understand that. And also, I suppose, getting into this location as well, Poseidon's, their project is nearby too, right? Which, does that give you more comfort that you are in the right location, if you will?
Well, we're sort of out on our own at Carboid.
Right.
There's not a lot of other mafic-layered intrusion. Well, it was the first mafic-layered intrusion found in Australia that was mineralised. It was the very first found. And when we did our studies on back in the early part of 2000, there was only 4 deposits in the whole of Australia. Carboid was one. That's why we're so keen. We were so keen. There was only one in. There was one of 4. So there was Carboid, Sally Malay, Nova Bollinger, and Radio Hill. So what we have there's a lot of intrusions around. There's a lot of intrusions, but they're not all mineralised.
Right.
We know Carboid is mineralised because we've seen it in the Carboid nickel mine and pipes where you have massive sulphide developed in the mine. So we're a long, long, long way in front of all of the junior mining companies that are looking around for geochemical signatures or looking for nickel sulphide mineralisation. We already have it and it's already known in the mine. What we're trying to do is find the source, and we've got the tools and the technology now that we believe will unravel this particular project.
Yeah, and what should we look for in your mind? Like, what would success look like over the next 6 to 12 months for the project at this point?
Yeah, look, certainly success for us is ultimately finding the source of the carboid nickel sulfides. There's absolutely no doubt that for us will be the ultimate prize. If we can find the tops of the nickel sulfide pipes that we believe are offset. At the moment, we believe that there is an offset of the pipes below ground at about 300 metres. We're looking for signatures for where those offset pipes lie and potentially lead us into the basal contact mineralisation or the source mineralisation. So any one of those 2 things would be a huge success. So we're currently drilling out carboid rocks. If we see any semi-massive, massive sulphide away from the immediate mine area, would be an extremely important and exciting time for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's a great time, obviously, because you're drilling. Also, I guess changing directions one thing a little bit. I noticed how focused you are, and can you just talk about, I suppose, from the corporate side of things? You recently divested your gold asset. You've done a capital raise. Can you just give us your thought process?
Yeah, so obviously the exploration programs they're not cheap exercises. The current program we're running is probably an $800,000-900,000 program. We're drilling some fairly deep diamond drill holes up to 600 and 650 metres. So they are expensive. So we had a decision to make whether we go back to the capital markets and raise and dilute the shareholder base and to put more money in to raise that capital for the exploration and the drilling, or we could look at testing the market to see whether our gold asset in the Munda, which was a 45,000 ounce high-grade resource just southwest of Kambalda, whether the market would entertain paying a price for that. So we did that. We tested the market, and with the high gold price and with a very tight gold asset space, we were bowled over. We really had to close the gate, stop letting people into literally into the process, because we were surprised ourselves how aggressive companies out there were to get their hands on gold assets, in particular open pittable high grade resources. So we got a very good price. We dealt with a very good group in Auric Mining, and I think they're looking to float. But we dealt that asset, and it's only sold in the last few weeks. We got 1.25 million in cash in the bank, and there's another $500,000 in milestone payments that will come through, I think, over the course of the journey that Auric explore and obviously increase their resources there. So from our point of view, it was we'd made a conscious decision to focus all of our attention into the nickel sulfide exploration assets, looking at obviously the background, the way the nickel market was heading, the thematic of the EV battery vehicle space. We all feel and know that there's a nickel boom coming. If it's not on our doorstep, it's certainly just around the corner. We believe that was the space for us to be. So the gold asset was sold, and we got a very good price for it for the shareholders, and thus we haven't diluted them. we only had to go out and raise another smaller amount of capital. We got some support from CPS Capital and others, 180 Markets, and we've been extremely fortunate that we haven't diluted our shareholders at this very important and critical point and juncture in the company's next phase. I suppose if we have some success, I certainly think that we get some nickel sulfides in the drilling. It's hang on to your seats. Strap yourself in. It's going to be a wild ride.
Absolutely, Chris. And I guess that in closing, because we try to keep these things tight, what's great is that we're actually going to see some results over the next, call it month or 2 months, if you will. And as you said, applying modern techniques, it is pretty exciting. Any closing words for the audience?
Yeah, look, it is an exciting time. We are drilling. We're very active. We're one drill hole away from being the next Chalice Mines or Legend Mining, going to, nearly circa $1 billion. We're going from a very small base of $10 million. So there's a lot of upside. We're extremely active. We've got geophysical crews out in the field now doing surface EM work over some of our surface geochemistry work that we did previously in the year, and got some high nickel copper grades out to the northeast of the mine. So it's only a matter of time before we unravel this, unlock the source of the carboid nickel sulfides. And as I said, strap yourself in, because it's going to be one hell of a ride. Thank you, Chris, so much. Appreciate it. We're there for the journey with you, and definitely keep us up with what's going on. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.